Welcome to the AI and Your Homeschool podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Manos, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're talking about AI, homeschooling, and how parents can thoughtfully prepare their children for a world of rapidly changing technology. I'm honored to welcome Israel Wayne to the podcast today. Israel is an author, a conference speaker who has a passion for defending the Christian faith and promoting a biblical worldview. He is the director of Family Renewal. Israel and his wife, Brooke, are homeschool graduates themselves and are homeschooling parents of 11 children. They live in Southwest Michigan. Israel, welcome.
Well, it's great to be with you, Nancy. I appreciate you inviting me on your podcast.
Well, this is going to be a great conversation. I'm excited to hear what you have to say. And my prayer, as we've talked about, is that parents would gain some clarity, and maybe if there's fear around technology, that we would be reminded that God is still on the throne, and we have wisdom as believers. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you. But before we jump into all of that, will you tell us a little bit about your own family's homeschool experience?
Well, I was homeschooled myself. My mother began homeschooling my older sister in 1978. She was 5 and I was 3. And she had done a month in public school, and my mom pulled her out and started homeschooling, not knowing that homeschooling was a thing, but also not knowing at that time we were on the East Coast, not knowing that it was against the law. And so we ended up in court related to homeschooling, and long story there, but I was homeschooled the entirety of my homeschool experience except for second grade and sixth grade, where we got caught homeschooling and went to court, and my mother opted, rather than having us like forcibly removed from the home and put in foster care, which was the kind of thing that could happen to you back then. She opted to put us in private Christian school for a year. And then at the end of that school year, took us back out, started homeschooling us again. We moved to a different location, but I graduated from homeschooling in 91. And so the entirety of my homeschooling experience was before it was legal. Homeschooling didn't become legal in the state in which I lived until 1992. And so very different kind of an environment than today. My wife, Brooke, was also homeschooled. And I kind of grew up a little bit on the leadership side of homeschooling as well. In 1988, my mother started publishing a national homeschool magazine. And then I ended up working for her publishing company for about 20 years, and have spent my whole professional career working in homeschool publishing. I've written books on homeschooling, and so and then also am vice president of our Michigan State Homeschool Association. So I've done a lot of different things within the homeschool community over the years, but I've pretty much spent my whole life here.
That is amazing, and we are thankful. You and I have talked over the years about like the pioneers and the settlers and then the bridge between. And it's interesting to me today, the number of homeschool families who don't realize the price that was paid, and those that have come before us that did homeschool when it was illegal, and who paved the way for the laws that we enjoy today, and how precious it is and how important it is to protect the freedom we enjoy. So thank you for all that you do. You and I got to know each other, I think, over the years, attending a leadership conference for leaders of statewide homeschool organizations. So thank you for sharing that. It's so fascinating. And I know that there's a lot more to your history, but I love getting to know people who have been in homeschooling for so many years. Okay, so in addition to being homeschooled and homeschooling, you have spent decades helping families to think biblically about parenting, education, and culture. So when a major technology such as artificial intelligence comes along, where should Christian parents begin? And then how should our calling to disciple our children shape the way that we respond to things like AI?
Well, I guess I should say also that in addition to being homeschooled, my wife and I have 11 children that we have homeschooled from birth, and they range in age from 26 all the way down to 5. We have 6 girls, 5 boys, and so we have this large spectrum of ages, right, represented within that family. And I think we have to deal with technology on all levels, but we deal with it differently depending on the ages involved.
Yes.
Right. And so we have at times had 4 teenagers living in our house at the same time. And then they have birthdays, right? So it kind of rolls over, and then you wait for the next segment. But yeah, I think that our responsibility to disciple them includes helping them to be able to think through the ethical issues related to technology and issues like AI. And I think what we tend to do as parents is maybe pendulum swing between ditches. So on one hand, there's the ditch of just kind of throwing our hands in the air and saying, "Oh, this is too much to navigate. It's just too hard. It's too difficult." Well, and then we just hit an eject button because we don't want to think about it, and so we just sort of let our kids find their own way with technology. And then another extreme might be to just say, "Oh, it's all bad. It's all evil. Let's just keep them away from it." And neither one of those positions is very sustainable. You have to find a path that realizes that we're in a world that will utilize technology and will utilize AI. And so we have to have conversations to help them to know how to think about it, and then
Yeah.
kind of what the parameters are for use, which is, I know, the purpose of the podcast.
It is. Yeah. I want, I have grandchildren. I heard you're a grandpa too. Is that right? You have a
Yes,
grandchild?
yeah. Well, that part's scary, right? Because that's all new to me. So yeah, that's still trying to get my head
Yes.
around that for sure. That's scary, scary territory there.
Right.
It's great though. It's beautiful.
It's the best, though. It
Yeah,
is
it's pretty cool.
beautiful. But I think about that with my grandchildren who are now almost 8 and 11 and the world that they're growing up in. And, that I think employers are going to require AI skills in a lot of careers. And so, how do we prepare them for that world? And so, some of the conversations we've had on the podcast really cycle around human skills and research and knowledge and things that you need to know before you ever touch the AI or the tool. So, I just think there's so much that we can gain confidence in as parents and grandparents so that our kids are prepared for the world that exists. We can't stick our head in the sand, right?
Right, for sure. Yeah, and it is scary because I think about the world in which we grew up in. We didn't grow up with all this. And
No.
so it's hard for us to imagine what it's like for these young people who are basically submersed in it. That
Yeah.
for many of them, it's their entire world, and everything about their world is informed by technology. So it changes the way that people think, the way that they find information, the way they make purchases. It's even redefined, social media has even redefined the term friend, right? And so everything about our world is completely different than it was 50 years ago. And so it does make it challenging. I think that, probably the biggest takeaway for me with the whole technology issue is that when you add something with technology, you also lose something. There's gains and losses in this exchange. And so the question I think we have to ask in the big picture is, are the things that we are gaining valuable enough for us them to displace the things that we're losing? And man, it's not easy to know how to navigate that, but it is a challenge. I'll just throw this out there as an anecdote that kind of comes to my mind. So I'm going to out myself with my age, and you'll remember this, so I'm outing both of us. But back in 2000, there was a thing called Y2K. And many of your listeners will have no idea what that is and what we're talking about because they weren't even born then. But Y2K was when the year 2000 happened. There was a fear that all the computers would roll back to, they were set with two digits and that they would not be able to function, and that a lot of the infrastructure of our country would shut down, and that power grids could go out, and people's not just home computers but mainframe computers, banking systems, public transportation, like all of it could just shut down. There was a tremendous amount of fear, and a lot of buildup to that time, trying to fix some of these computer glitches and all that. I remember having a conversation with my grandfather, who was raised in a house in Arkansas that had no electricity or indoor plumbing. This is during the Great Depression. And so, he grew up in the 30s, and I made a joke to him because he did have a personal computer that he really didn't know how to use. And I asked him, I said, so Grandpa, are you scared that when Y2K happens, that you're not going to be able to access your computer? Kind of a joke, because I knew he barely ever turned it on. And he just kind of smiled, and I said, and beyond that, are you scared that you're not going to be able to survive when everything shuts down. And he laughed. He said, "Let me tell you something, son." He said, "I spent my whole childhood without any kind of electricity. I mean, not just technology, without electricity." He said, "I know how to survive perfectly well." He said, "I'm not worried the slightest bit about me. I'm concerned about you." He said, "You don't know how to do anything without electricity." And he wasn't wrong, and there really is a very different world that we grow up in. And I love electricity. Like, I like refrigeration, I like air conditioning, I like all of the
Yes.
perks that go along with the inventions that have been made for us. But there were things that he knew about how to grow your own food, how to raise your own food, how to survive, without a food chain and without all the stuff that we're dependent on, a transportation grid and all that kind of stuff. He could do fine. And my generation, and certainly the younger you get, the less you even know about those things, the less we know. And so I just think those are things that we have to think about, right? And it doesn't mean that we all have to go back and be Amish, but yeah, we have some amazing benefits to all these conveniences, but at the same point, it creates dependency, doesn't it?
It does. And loss. We have deficits because of the technology that we're dependent on, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Um, it's I think back to, like, it was Socrates was worried about things being written down that we wouldn't be able to remember stories. So these kind of disruptions and change has happened for millennia.
That's right.
So, okay, so you have explained, I've heard you explain that Christian parenting cannot simply be about producing outwardly well-behaved children, right? We're not just about the performance. Could talk a little bit about how that applies to technology. I don't think our goal is getting our kids to obey a list of screen or technology rules. It's really more heart related. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think with internet use, for example, whenever I talk about this topic at conferences, parents come up and they say, "Well, what kind of software can we use to protect our children against the bad things that are out there on the internet? What filtering software, what accountability software do you recommend?" And I always hesitate to recommend anything for a couple of reasons. One is, if they use something I recommend and their child gets into something, I get
Right.
sued, right? So
Yeah.
there's always that. But just on the broader scope, I don't think any of those tools are foolproof. And I just think our children are always going to be smarter than we are, and they're going to be more adaptable. I mean, if you look at, I've seen graphs where they chart adults' capacity to understand technology, and it kind of takes off like this, but at a certain age, it sort of like levels out, it plateaus, right? And so that ability to understand technology, which grows at just an exponential rate of increase, we kind of cap out. But those younger children, like, they have the ability to continue to adapt. And so I just think that if you're counting on some external force to keep all the bad stuff away, it's probably going to be inadequate. And that doesn't mean don't use it. I'm an advocate for using all that stuff, have as much of that kind of stuff available as possible, because it keeps the bad things from popping up unexpectedly. And so I'm a fan of using those things. But it ultimately is a heart issue, right? I had a conversation with a guy on the West Coast who worked for the U.S. military in cybersecurity, and that was his job. And so he was telling me, I had dinner in his home, that he had set up his home internet to where he said, "This cannot be hacked. Like, this is government level cybersecurity," he thought. And then he found out that his 15-year-old had found a workaround. And he explained to me how he had done it, how he had circumvented the whole system. And I told him, I said, "You need to get your son a job with the U.S. government, or he's going to be in prison." Like, because he's basically has outthought his dad, who makes a living doing this. So that's why I'm saying, like, I just think we have to really focus on having those heart conversations. And as Christians, like, from a spiritual standpoint, we want our children to really love God and to want to do the right things for the right reasons. And if that's not there, and they just have a desire to get into all the bad things, man, that's just going to be a fight on our hands. So I think, rather than focusing on just constantly trying to put out fires, I think it's much more important to really focus on teaching our children the importance of being pure at heart. And that is something that really comes from them having a relationship with the Holy Spirit. Not just some external list of rules of do's and don'ts, but them actually loving God and wanting to please Him. And that comes from them having their heart changed and renewed and regenerated by the Holy Spirit. And so that's something that I know sounds cliche as Christians, but I do think that's the most important thing that we can focus on, and not merely techie solutions to what ultimately are going to be mostly heart problems.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. It's true, because isn't our nature the path of least resistance, the easiest route, especially for kids? They don't want to do the hard work, but it's the struggle, it's the effort, it's the overcoming obstacles that really is what we need for our growth and maturity, right?
For sure.
Okay, so talking about time, affirmation, and encouragement being central to a parent's influence. So let's talk a little bit about um, the influence that parents have and how, like, technology is really competing with that in a lot of ways. I've seen so many reports of teenagers, especially, they don't want to reveal that they're struggling with something, so it's easier to talk to a chatbot. But we want to retain the hearts of our children so that they'll come to us when they're struggling, right? So talk a little bit about the importance of, your influence as a parent, and then what are some ways to really cultivate that?
Well, I was doing a parenting seminar in a church like within the last year or so, and there's probably 150 people there, and I asked them to raise their hand in response to a question. I said, raise your hand if you want to be the most important, most influential person in your child's life. And like maybe three hands went up. And as a
Really?
speaker, when something like that happens, you're always like second guessing yourself, like, oh, did I word it wrong? Did I not ask it right? You're trying to run all this through your mind real quick. And so I was like, okay, I get Jesus, right? We want Jesus to be the most influential person in our child's life. I get that, right? But I'm saying on a human level, in terms of human input, um, do you want as a person, do you want to be the most influential person in your child's life, or someone else? And maybe like 10 or 15 hands total go up in a room of like 150 parents. I was just stunned. I was actually, I'm not speechless very often, but I like didn't know where to go from there
Sure.
as a speaker.
Wow.
I was like, I feel like we need to figure this out before we go further. Like, what's going on
Right.
here? And I was just having a real hard time getting audience participation. Got a response later that evening talking to one lady, and so I don't think I completely understand the situation, but she said, well, I don't really think that I do want to be the most influential person in my child's life. And I said, why is that? And she said, well, I don't know that I'm the best role model. I said, okay. So she goes, I just think there are other people, like teachers, or like other people, maybe youth group leaders or Sunday school teachers, or people that I think are probably like better role models than me, that would be better to influence them than me. And again, I was speechless because
Yeah.
so I'm just going to lay down a presupposition. Okay, this is a foundational assumption that I have, that apparently is not shared by all Christian parents, and this might tell a lot, right? But I believe we as Christian parents should want to be, humanly speaking, the most influential people in our children's lives. That's my assumption. Okay, so we're going to start there. So that's my starting point. So then I ask, well, how do you do that? And the two most powerful forces for influence are time, number one, which is the most important. Whoever spends the most time with the child is going to have the most influence. But then the kind of time that you spend is also very significant. So there are people who homeschool their children, for example, but they're so stressed out about it that they make the whole experience miserable for the child, and the child doesn't really want to be there, and they feel the stress being passed on to them. And so we have to make sure that not only do we have the time, but that we make it the right kind of time. And so the second most powerful force for influence in another person's life, but particularly in our children, is encouragement and affirmation. And so it's basically generally true that whoever spends the most time with your child and affirms your child the most wins in terms of influence. and only 5% of parents homeschool. Even in the evangelical Christian community, it's only 5%. So that means that by the percentages, 95% of all parents will never be the most influential force in their child's life because they've given away, 7.5 hours of their 15-hour waking day to strangers. And then sociologists tell us that those young people spend an additional 7.5 hours after school in screens and multimedia. So you add school plus screen time, and that's 15 hours a day. U.S. Department of Labor Statistics, U.S. government says that the average mom spends 1 hour a day with her children in any kind of meaningful interaction, and the average father now is 29 minutes. So
Wow.
basically, you get an hour of parental involvement, 15 hours of school time, and for 85% of Christian families, that's anti-Christian government schools, right? So it's not religiously neutral information that they're getting. It's actually like hostile to their faith. And then the 7.5 hours of digital screen time, Dr. George Barna, says that only about 2% of Christian young people have a different media palette than their non-Christian friends. So that means like 98% of Christian young people, or those raised in Christian homes, watch the same movies, the same TV shows, listen to the same music, play the same violent video games, have the exact same social media experience. There's like no difference in the way that they interface with entertainment than their non-Christian friends. So again, to assume that the government school system and then Hollywood and the music industry and the gaming industry and social media, that these are like religiously neutral systems is to live under the most destructive of illusions. And so parents have to realize that's 15 hours a day of mostly negative input. However, the kids are getting affirmed by their peers, by their friends, sometimes by their teachers. They're getting affirmed by the dopamine hits of the games that they play, of the entertainment that they consume, and the social media that they are involved in, the thumbs up and the likes and all of that. So the dominance of their time and their affirmation is coming from non-parental sources. And I think even for homeschoolers, there are homeschoolers who buy back that 7.5 hours a day of school time, but the kids are still doing the 7.5 hours a day of multimedia, right? And interestingly, the sociologists tell us it's actually more than that. It's actually 10.5 hours of digital data compressed into a 7.5 hour time period because they multitask and they're plugged into two devices at the same time. So, it's an incredible amount of information that's coming into their brains, and parents are doing very little to negate that. And it's a convenient babysitter for a lot of parents. They say it's the only thing that will occupy their child and make them sit down and be quiet, stop creating chaos in the house. And so it's just a convenient go-to for so many parents. And so we're losing the influence as it's being gained by the screens. And then when you talk about AI specifically, these young people are developing a relationship with these AI modules where they actually see this as their friend, and the AI modules are trained to affirm. And so you're getting those dopamine hits of affirmation from the AI modules. And then sadly, to our shame as parents, so much of our interaction with our children is negative. It's, have you taken the trash out? And why didn't you finish your homework? And, why did you leave your clothes on the floor? And it's just mostly negative interaction, correcting, right? And so we just lose out on that front. And young people, especially who don't get that affirmation from their parents, which is who they should be getting it for, they just increasingly move towards the sources that are giving them the dopamine rush.
Oh my goodness, it's true. Well, and like you said, AI is very affirming. Israel, you're thinking about this right. Great insights, great question. Like everything in these chatbots is geared towards affirmation and making you sound and feel really smart. And for especially teenagers who I think are struggling sometimes with self confidence or whatever, or just being affirmed and having relationships, it can fill a need that really humans only should be filling, and the Lord. Because it can sound spiritual and it can sound wise, but it is neither. It's not the Holy Spirit and it is not wise. It's just predictive text that sounds
Correct.
human. So,
Correct.
what can parents do following up on that? Like, what are some ways to build influence? You know, think of the typical homeschool family. You're home during the day, you've got a culture of family. If you've outsourced some of your time to screens, like, how do you regain that? Is it board games? Is it cooking together, gardening? You know, like, is it volunteering? What are I guess it could be anything, but do you have thoughts about what's helped you have influence with your kids and what works for parents?
My take on this is less is more when it comes to technology, particularly when they're young. And I just think that thousands of years of humans have been raised without all this stuff, right? And it's only this really recent window of time that people are just immersed and bathed in this. So I think we will find out. I mean, we are finding out, but I think you roll the tape forward 50 years, and what we're going to see is the absolute detriment of us allowing our children to be saturated in all of this. I think the science will be overwhelming and conclusive that this little window, this experiment that we engaged in of just allowing children to be saturated in all of this digital media has been phenomenally destructive to their brains, to their mental health, to their emotional well being. I mean, we're already seeing it with Gen Z, right? They're already the most anxious, the most depressed, the most emotionally troubled generation in American history. And most sociologists are pointing that back to the influence of things like social media and just the omnipresence of it. It's everywhere. It's all the time. It's the glut of information. It's just the inability to be able to unplug from it. The FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. The just having your affirmation tied to what people think about you or say about you on social media. So I think literally like getting out of the house and go taking a walk and doing things that have some physical exertion to them, that are just get out in nature. And there are a lot of movements towards this right now that I think people are seeing. We've just gone too far. But I think as a culture, I don't think we've hit rock bottom on this yet.
No.
And I hate to be predictive because I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I don't think we've seen the beginning of the end of how far culture is going to go in getting obsessed with this. I think there's a long road ahead of us that people are going to go down some really long dark tunnels, particularly with AI, and just how destructive that's going to end up being. And so, again, I think 50 to 100 years from now, I think we're going to be able to look back and go, oh man, somebody needed to put the brakes on, right? And it's not going to be the federal government. It's not going to be big tech. It's not going to be billionaires who are becoming trillionaires because of it. They're not going to put the brakes on it. So who needs to do that? Well, we need to, right, as parents. And so my view is um, that it's around the tween ages that we really need to start talking with them about how technology is going to be a significant part of their life. I have a 5-year old and a 7-year old. They're my two youngest. And I just try to keep them off screens as much as possible. They may watch like an educational video every once in a while, or maybe have like a typing program or something like that. But they have very little interface with technology at all, and they want more. I mean, they kind of crave it, right? In those tween years, I'm still not introducing a lot of it. Um, I'll just give a few benchmarks of what we do. And I throw this out not because our family is the standard for anybody else's family. We're not, and no family really should be. But just to kind of give other parents like an idea, maybe I'm just going to give them an idea of like how strange and bizarre our family is. But sometimes I think we actually need to hear of like, okay, so there's another family out there. Here's what they do. So like at 12 years old, I give our children an email address where they have the ability to correspond with their close relatives and maybe with a few close friends. We will always want to have access to that, just to make sure that everything's okay. But they can send some messages to some close friends at church or some relatives. And then at 16, I allow my kids to get a social media account. Some of them have chosen not to do it. Um, and then most of them use it really in moderation. Um, but in terms of like smartphones, we get dumb phones for our kids because a lot of times at like age 12 or so, they start getting into things like our family's into Bible quizzing. So they'll go away sometimes and be in programs that maybe their mom and I aren't there for a few hours, but we want to be able to reach them and we want them to be able to reach us. So it's really for safety and for convenience, but they're call and text only phones, no internet enabled capacity at all. But with smartphones, I tell them, you can have a smartphone when you have a job and pay for it, because that's really when you need one. And then beyond that, they just have access to um, like a family laptop that has filtering and accountability software on it that they use in the living room or in another public space. They don't get internet enabled devices that they use in their rooms. And I know that maybe sounds crazy, but, and again, I'm not saying like your family has to do exactly what our family is, but I'm just saying like have some benchmarks. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to parents who their 11-year-old has like an internet enabled laptop and a smartphone in their room with no filters whatsoever. And they are like, well, their friends have it. We don't want our 11-year-old to think we don't trust them. And um, and but they're always coming to me with horror stories and tragedies of what bad things have happened because of that, right? And then they're saying, okay, so this has been going on for 5 years, and now we find out that our child is phenomenally broken and needs lots of therapy. What do we do, right? So I just don't see the benefit, whatever benefit there is in your 11-year-old feeling like they're not left out. It's the trade-off, the payoff is not worth it to me. And so I've actually had, oh, well, here's probably the strangest thing of all. When Brooke and I got married, we've been married 27 years now. And when we got married, we decided before we were married that we never wanted a video game console.
Okay.
We were like, we will never have one. And we didn't want cable television. And so we've never had cable television. We've never had video games. And our kids have never missed it, and like they don't even know that they should miss it because to them it's just not a part of their childhood. And so I've always just felt that parents are often too permissive in feeling they have to keep up with what all the other families are doing. And two of my young adult sons who are grown, and one of them is married, the other is moving towards a relationship. um, they've both come to me and said independently, Dad, thank you for not raising us with video games, because all of our friends in their 20s who are men, some of whom are even young married guys, are video game addicted. And they're like, we just see how much this has hindered their life, because a lot of them really are on the edge or maybe even past the edge of addiction. And they've just said it's sad like that our friends are like that. And we're just grateful that like we don't need it. We don't feel the loss because we've never really had it. So they both thanked me for that. And so rather than growing up being resentful because they were kept from all the fun um, in their young adult years, they've actually said, hey, we're glad we never had that introduced. And so because they never became dependent on it. So I just think we as parents need to stop being persuaded by peer pressure that everybody else is doing it, right? And you shouldn't be persuaded by peer pressure of like, oh, well, Israel says don't do it. I'm not the standard for that. I just say in our family, it's those kinds of parameters have borne really good fruit, and we haven't seen a downside to any of those choices that we've made.
That's so good. It, like you said, I heard you in a recording, was it with Ginger Hubbard recently, that it's easier to not have introduced technology than to take it away, because then they're feeling that loss after an addiction has begun. I know I struggle. I am a grandmother and I get caught in reels on Instagram or Facebook, and they're designed to keep you
Oh, for
looking
sure.
and that
Oh, for sure.
dopamine hit. And so if we as adults, mature adults, are tempted by it, how much more are children and teens with, underdeveloped brains? They're not fully developed. And I think there's really power in doing real things, like you said, getting outside, going for walks, doing things together as a family. I'm so thankful that my family, the girls in their teen years, social media had come on the scene. I think they graduated in 2010 and 2011, but their whole childhood was board games and time together, serving at church, cooking, and they did a lot of art projects and things like that. And it wasn't, we may have had music on in the background or occasionally watched a movie, but it wasn't all screen driven.
Yeah.
And it's just such a slippery slope. And like you said, it's I think there's gratitude for the freedom because it wastes time, and time
Yeah.
is one thing you cannot get back. Once it's gone, it's gone. And what
Yeah.
could you have done with that time if you hadn't spent 5 hours today playing video games or whatever?
For sure. And just yeah, learning that art of being productive, I think is something that we really have gotten away from in our American culture as well.
That's true. Well, and it's so gratifying. I feel like our kids, in some ways, can be robbed of that, the gratification of creating something or building something or making something. Um, when we put our hands to something, it's very rewarding, and we want our kids to experience that. They should be gratified in the work that they do, even if it's overcoming a math challenge or like they should experience the victory of I persisted and I overcame that. And we don't want to steal that from our children as they grow.
Oh, for sure. And God is a creative God. And so he created us in his image. And so when we're creating, we really do reflect his glory.
Yes. Yeah, it's so true. So parents often worry that they don't know what careers or skills will matter by the time their children are adults. How should Christian parents be preparing their children for this world that they can't predict?
Yeah, that's something that I'm struggling with right now. I'm in the middle of that. In fact, it was interesting that it was actually through a couple of those National Homeschool Leadership Conferences this past year that the Lord may have helped us to kind of redirect a little bit. I have a son who is a teenager who is kind of a math genius. Um, Advanced math just comes really easy to him, and that's not true for most people, right? So I've told him if there's something that you can do that like 90% of the people in the world can't do, usually people will pay you an awful lot of money to do those things that they
Right.
don't know how to do, that they don't have the capacity to do. And so we were looking at, well, what are jobs that can utilize that? And so we started going online and looking and even using AI, right, to look up some of those things. And engineering certainly plays into mathematics. And one of the levels of engineering that seems to have a lot of flexibility and really good return in terms of income, the software engineering. So I went to two AI sessions at these National Homeschool Leadership Conferences where the speakers were talking about AI and different facets of it. And afterward, went up and talked to both of the speakers and said, "What if you have a young person who's looking at getting into some kind of software engineering? What would be your advice?" And they make their living in tech. They both said, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Because basically AI is now coding better than humans. And so, unless you're going into a field where you're going to be coding AI, there's really not a need for you to be in that industry. Like even right now, there's not really much of a need for that. And they're like, give it a few years, 2, 3, 4 years, like lots of people are going to be unemployed who are in that world. Now, I'm not saying that, okay? So I don't want people to get mad at me because I don't know that and I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying that's what two people who make their living in tech and were teaching on AI told me. And so Brooke and I came home, we talked with our teenager, we said, okay, we might want to rethink this. And so one of the things that they told me was if you have your child in a career that where their job requires some level of actual physical input, like there are still people who need to physically put information into a machine, or they need to repair a machine, or there's an actual tactile component to this job that's not just bits and data, um, then they may have job security. But it's so strange because it does seem like a lot of these jobs that are becoming very popular, but again, that people don't like doing because they're hard work, that are paying well, are like welding and HVAC and a lot of the trades, right? Becoming an electrician. And so for decades now, we've just had everybody wants to get into software programming. And that may not be something that's there for us in the same way. I'm sure there'll still be some people that work in it, but so this is all uncharted territory, and I think we're all trying to find our way there. And I mean, our own family is trying to figure out. Okay, so we were thinking, leaning kind of in a certain direction. Maybe we need to pivot. Maybe we need to think in a different direction. And so a lot of those things, even accounting and just so many of these industries. I'm an author. I have a sister who is an editor. And there's questions about how is that going to change the publishing industry, especially for editors, right? And we don't know. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. We know that a lot of jobs are going to be replaced. We don't know in what ways, but I do think that anything that is going to require an actual human giving a service that people need is going to be there, right? Auto mechanics and things like that. You have to have somebody there. Physical therapy, like you're not going to have physical therapy through AI. Somebody's going to have to be there to actually help you.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot to it, but I do think that we need to be having those conversations, and I'm having those conversations with my children and trying to help them navigate through that. And I don't know that I have those answers, but I do think we need to be aware that the world is not the same world that we grew up in, and it's not even going to be the same world that our kids are growing up in 20 years. It's going to be radically different because of AI.
Yes, that's so true. It's funny at church on Sunday, we did what's called Brown Bag Sunday. And so we bring our lunch. I don't know how often this happens, once a month, once every other month or something. And I ordered a salad because I forgot to bring something. And DoorDash sent it in one of the little robots. And
Oh my.
everybody was out front, like, what's happening? It was so fun to have it actually. But then I think, like, I love to order. I order my groceries on Instacart and
Sure.
things like that. And I love to tip well. And I'm so thankful that someone else walked to the grocery store for me. Um,
Yeah.
but how much is being, even those kind of things are being replaced by machines. And I hate the loss of the human element. But what do we do with that disruption? Because there's been
Well,
disruptions for all of time,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, you live in Phoenix,
Yep.
and the Womo thing there. Brooke's dad and stepmom live there, and they use it all the time,
Yes.
and have actually moved to now a driverless Tesla that they own, and so because they're in their 80s, and that's how they get around, and it's safer than them
Yep.
driving on their own. And hadn't thought about it really until this conversation, but like I use a commercial, and you do as well, commercial airlines all the time. What happens when that becomes Waymo?
Right? Yes.
Right?
Oh
And
boy.
the computers just fly the planes, and you don't have an actual pilot in the cockpit because theoretically you don't need him anymore. I mean, this is the world that we're entering, and it's crazy scary, right? On one level, and there will be so many conveniences to all of those things because that just the efficiency I think that AI is going to provide. But yeah, there will be industries that will be completely revolutionized. I still suspect that some person is going to physically onload and offload my luggage, though, right? So
Right. Yes. I would hope so. I mean, maybe
I
they'll
would
have
hope
robots, but
maybe, maybe the robots will be trained to not chuck it, right?
well, one could hope, right? Oh my goodness. Are there
But yeah,
ways?
they're tough things to figure out.
Right? Well, and this is where I think a relationship with the Lord is extra critical for so many reasons, all the reasons we've talked about. But if we didn't know Jesus, if we didn't have hope, um, and assurance of our future and things that we could rely on because God is true to his word, I think this could be a very scary time in history.
Oh,
And
for
I
sure.
don't think it needs to be.
No,
God is not surprised by this technology. And
that's right.
we are here for such a time as this. And our children were born for this season. And I think
Hmm.
that we can steward this well, with biblical wisdom and a solid foundation in the Word of God. And so I think as homeschoolers, too, we have an opportunity as believers who homeschool because we have time with our kids and we can have these important conversations and shepherd them through this time. So, have you thought about, are there any ways that technology can be used to serve? And how do we teach our kids to look as technology as a tool to serve versus just something we consume?
Yeah. Well, and that's the template, right, for our children. We have our family mission statement in our living room, and it says, "We exist to know, love, and serve God, and love and serve other people." So that's the end goal of our life. And everything else is a means to that goal. So work, education, finances, like all of those things are means, and they're means to loving and serving God by loving and serving other people. So teaching them that whatever you do, like as a career, should be motivated by, I want to love and serve other people. And if that's not your motivation for why you go to your work and why you work a job, I would say, hate to be this guy, but check your heart. Um, because if your motivation is just like, I go because I get a paycheck and I make money, all right, but that's a means to something, right? And so what is that a means to? And you say, well, it's to pay the bills, okay, but pay the bills is still a means. Well, so that I can own a house and I can own a car. Okay, but even a house and a car are means. They're not ends. And so ultimately, everything that we do in life is supposed to be about glorifying God and serving Him by loving and serving other people. And so work is really that. It's about providing value to other people. And so you can absolutely use tools to make people's lives better and to help them and to have a better life. And as Christians, there's so many ways in which we want to represent Christ as we're doing that. But if people are hungry and you get the opportunity to make them a hamburger at a restaurant, man, you're serving them, you're blessing them. Somebody's plumbing is not working and they have a leak in their basement, you get to bless them by fixing that if you know how. If they need to get from one part of the country to the other and you know how to fly a plane, or if you're a surgeon, I mean, just think about what a blessing that is to somebody to be able to successfully do a surgery, where you don't botch it,
Right.
you don't like stitch them up and there's body parts left over and you don't know where they go. This is why academics matter in the
Yes.
homeschool context, right? We want to be skilled at what we do. We want to be excellent at what we do. Why? Because we want to bless people and we want to help them by doing a good job and doing it right. And that reflects on our Creator
Yes.
and on our Savior if we're believers. So, anyway, all of those things, I think it's so important that we teach our children the value of service. And AI is a tool. It's like any other tool, and it's a productivity tool predominantly. I mean, that's the way I see it at this
Yeah.
point. Is it can help streamline things and can help us be more efficient, but if we don't know what our end goal is, like with any kind of ethics, you have to start with your why, right? And
Yes.
so we have to start with our why. What is our why for anything that we do that's related to life and related to work and then related to technology, related to tools? Does this help us to achieve our end goal, which should be blessing other people and serving them in love? And if we can use AI to do that, we absolutely should. And I got in all kinds of trouble for posting this on
Uh-oh.
social media, so I'll just bring that drama here to your podcast.
Great.
But I was talking with one of the largest Christian ministries in the world, and this ministry is really committed to evangelism and spreading the gospel and bringing Scripture to all the nations of the world. And I asked them the question. I said, "What part does AI play in this?" And they said AI is going to have a massive part. in Bible translation. And we're still going to need humans, right, to make sure that it's correct. We're going to have to fact check it. We can't just rely on AI to do that, but that AI can expedite processes that would take humans thousands of hours, and AI can do it sometimes in minutes. And boy, I got all kinds of pushback, which I didn't really expect from my Facebook friends who were scared by that idea.
Really?
And I understand some reasons why they could be scared, right? Because we don't want AI giving us the word of God.
Right.
There's a human element that has to be, we need scholars to still check this and make sure that this is accurate. But the labor part of it, right? We have had people who are missionaries in these Bible translation groups for dozens of years, slaving over one language, and some of that could be done maybe even in hours, as opposed to dozens of years. So I'm excited about some of the things that AI can potentially provide, even in terms of the expansion of the gospel. We have to have the right set of ethics to know how to utilize that. And unfortunately, as Christians, I don't think we're the ones that are controlling the back end of AI, right? And so I wish we had, maybe some better modules that, like, we're putting the right kind of inputs in on the back end. But the capacity for good is exponential, as is the capacity for evil. It's like science, it's like medicine, it's like any other kind of technology or advancement. It can be used for good or evil.
Yeah, that's right. I think about it, even me in my work, helping Zan Tyler with her podcast and doing my own podcast and running the national conference for state homeschool leaders. Um, if AI can save me some time so I can
Hmm.
serve more people and be more present for my family and, serve more at church and things like that, I think there's a lot of advantage to, are there tasks that a technology could speed up and save me some time so I'm more available for other things? I think
Yes,
that's a good use of technology.
there's a downside too, right? Because like, let's say that a pastor says I could really save time by just having AI write my sermon. Well, there's something that is powerful about a sermon that comes out of real life experience, and you wrestling with God and the scripture and finding reality that's worked its way through your life, and you share that, and there's a conviction that is communicated by somebody who's actually lived the truth. They own it in the deepest part of their soul, that when they speak that it's life-giving. And I know that, pastors already can just go online and pay for a sermon that some other human wrote, so we're already doing that, sadly. But that's a productivity thing that AI can do for you. And in terms of research, yeah, I mean, it can certainly speed up and expedite a lot of research that would have taken hours and hours. Maybe you can get that information much quicker. And so I'm not saying pastors can never utilize AI, but I do think there are things where it's just going to be so easy for people to, write that article for the homeschool newsletter, have AI write it, or to write their sermon. And that's where we're going to feel the loss, I think, is where this is not really coming out of who we are at the core of our being. It's not truth that's been tested on the inside. So those are things that I think we really need to make commitments to ourselves personally, that we're just not going to use AI in those ways. We're not going to allow ourselves to sell out to the convenience in ways that really are not only unethical, but are just not spiritually beneficial.
Right. Well, and it can quote the Bible, but it will never be inspired by the Holy Spirit. And like you said, there's something about wrestling, reading the scripture. What does this mean? Praying, talking to God, using your own experience. So I love that. I think, as we kind of wrap up, what encouragement would you offer to parents who maybe are feeling behind or afraid they've already made too many mistakes with technology? Because that can be part of the equation also, right? Do you have any advice or encouragement for parents as we live in this wild world?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like for me, I was somewhere in the middle of my parenting process that I came across this idea, which I'm sure was not original to me, but that I really latched onto of that we're all consumers in one sense, but that we have a choice of being either predominantly producers or predominantly consumers. And that from a biblical worldview, productivity and work is something that God sanctioned in the original garden. Work was not cursed. The ground was cursed. So work became more difficult because the ground was cursed, but work was given as a commission before there was a fall. And so work is part of God's good created order. So us learning to produce and to create and to work is something that is honoring to God, and it's part of who we are. It's who God made us to be, and so we're really, I think, our most fulfilled selves when we're fulfilling part of the purpose for which God put us on the earth, to take dominion over it in the right way, in a godly way. And so those are things that I think we're never too old or too far past the curve to like go, okay, I've never really framed that to my children. I've never really taught that to them, but we can come back in and go ahead and teach the truth as it becomes clear to us. And I think there are ways in which we all, as parents, maybe missed key elements in their early years. And, God meets us where we are, right? He's gracious to us. And so there may be people who are just listening to your podcast who have never thought about any of these things. And they have made all kinds of mistakes and introduced way too many things too early. And I would say try not to be a bull in the china shop if you're having to remove things, right? That if you take something away, you have to replace it with something. And so that's going to be a bit of a transition. So try not to alienate your kids by just like pulling the plug on all the electronics in a week, but to have a plan and to say, okay, we've gone too far in this direction. We're going to have to compensate. We're going to have to back up, and we're going to need to move. But I think tell your children, hey, we've made mistakes. We weren't wise in allowing all of these influences, and these have not been good influences. These have been negative. We've had negative fruit in our family from it, and so we as parents, we need to repent before God, and because we didn't do right. And I think children can respect that if they see that you really are making the changes for their good. They'll still push back. They'll still not like it. They'll still drag their feet and argue. Like things are, if you try to roll back technology use with your children or teens, it will always get way worse before it gets better.
Oh, yes.
And there's always going to be a fight. And most parents will just bail in the fight stage. Please don't do that. Like realize there's value in you continuing in the right direction and being obedient, that the fruit will come down the road. You have to get through the messiness of what really in most cases is like a digital detox. It's like a drug addiction.
It is.
It really, I mean, I'm not just saying that. Like there's a lot of articles that you can look at that are scientifically based, that these dopamine addictions that these young people have to screens is on the same level as crack and some of these most highly addictive substances. And so we as parents have to realize that this is a real, I mean, your kid's going to go through some kind of physical withdrawal, not having the games, not having the entertainment, not having the social media. And so you have to be wise about that. But yeah, I just think be the parent. Like, don't be afraid to do the right thing for your child. I always tell parents, never apologize to anyone, even your own child, for doing the right thing for your child. And you'll get pushback. You will. But your child's most important need is for you to be the parent, not for you to be their buddy. They have buddies, but they only have you as the parent. So you have to be that person because no one else is going to be that for them. And I think that's what God expects of us.
Well, and we have to also curb our own habits. If we, as the parent or grandparent in my case, have, my phone is always in my hand. And sometimes I'm like, I don't need this here. And I like to listen to a podcast while I'm cooking. Maybe I just need some quiet. And your kids and your grandkids are watching you. And so you can't just go in and go, all right, you're detoxing. I also might need a detox, right? So we need to
Yeah, for
set a
sure.
good example, because they're not going to respect us if, even if it's for work or whatever, if your phone is always in your hand, they're not going to
Yeah.
be like, well, then I shouldn't have to give up my stuff because you're not. So there's something
Yeah,
that,
and here's a good point to that. My younger kids, when they were growing up, they would come out in the morning. I'd be in the living room and I'd be sitting in a chair with a Bible on my lap. And that's their memory of their dad. And so what do they all do? Well, they all, when they wake up in the morning, they start their day with the Bible in their lap. Now, I don't make them do that. Like they're adults now, right? But they saw that modeled, they saw the importance of that, and they just developed that as something like they wanted to do. And then I realized my younger kids, I switched over to my Bible app, and I would usually like listen with earbuds and then kind of read along with it. And they saw me with my phone, and they don't know that I'm on the Bible. I mean, I could be on Instagram or X or Facebook or whatever. And so I kind of realized like my younger kids, they need to see me with a Bible on my lap. And so there's ways in which even if we're still like maintaining spiritual disciplines and maybe doing it in a way that's more convenient for us, like that, using a Bible app. I love the audio aspect of it. What kind of message are we sending to our kids? And so my younger kids might be growing up thinking, well, dad just loves his phone. He's just always on it. And so I think there's ways we can be intentional, even with that, to just let them see us with a print Bible on our lap, to realize that's what we prioritize, and that's what we're kind of giving ourselves to, not just, he just hangs out online all day.
right? Yeah. Yes. Oh, this is so helpful. Israel, do you have any closing thoughts? Any last piece of advice you want to share? Anything that comes to mind related to technology or AI that parents might need to be thinking about?
Well, I think you need to think of the fact that, you're a parent, you have children, but you also have friends who are parents who have children. And so you need to find your friends and tell them about Nancy's podcast and send them an invite and encourage them to subscribe and to listen, because this is content that, honestly, Nancy, I don't know anywhere else that they're getting it, right? I mean, I know there are podcasts who will have an episode,
Yeah.
but the fact that you're actually really digging into this in a pretty profound way, I think, is exciting. And so I think let's be intentional. Let's be willing to engage ourselves with the hard questions. And I love that you're creating a platform for where to do that. And so,
Thanks.
yeah, just to be willing to keep learning, because this whole AI thing is changing and adapting so quickly. We dare not lock down on what we think we know about it,
Yeah.
because a year from now it could be a completely different ball game. And so we have to kind of stay up on what's happening and hopefully stay ahead of our kids. I know it's
Right.
almost impossible, but to try. And so I think this is a great platform for them to be able to do that.
Well, you're very kind. I appreciate it. That is why I started this, because there are people in the Christian homeschool space talking about AI, but not very many. And I just see this becoming, it's a runaway train. We can't keep up. Even if you're paying attention full time, you can't keep up with all of the changes in technology and AI. And so my heart is really to encourage parents. God has called us to this time. Our children were born now. And I believe we can steward this technology wisely and with discernment, and we can teach our kids the skills they need for the future ahead of them. And so, Israel, I'm just so thankful that you took the time to join me today. I think this has been a really meaningful conversation. And I'm just so grateful for the wisdom and the perspective that you have and all the years that you have served families in the Christian parenting space and homeschooling too. And so, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I have a couple of websites. So you can visit familyrenewal.org. That's our ministry website, familyrenewal.org. My speaking website is my name, israelwayne.com. And then I'm on all the social media platforms because I'm a good little hypocrite. And and so we would love for you to also sign up on our email list so we can keep in touch with you. Mostly what we do with that is let you know when we're speaking in your area. So that's at our website, familyrenewal.org. And then Brooke and I have a parenting podcast. It's called Raising Them Up. And so if you love podcasts and you want to add another one to your playlist, Raising Them Up, it's anywhere that raisingthemup.org. you can go there or anywhere else, and we'd love to connect with you there as well.
That's awesome. I will include all the links in the show notes. So, Israel, thanks so much for joining me. And to my listeners, if you have enjoyed this podcast, I invite you to subscribe and share it with a friend. And we will see you next time.